We're happy that you guys, some of you have come back to join us today. Well, first, let's get started with some intros. I'm Jessie Neor. I'm one of the original founders, president of Grandview Aviation, which sold a few years ago. We've gotten a couple mentions today. We were formerly a customer of GoGo with our 17 aircraft fleet of Phenom 300s. And now I run a consulting group, Flyvisor for M&A and business aviation. And I also have a podcast, The VIP Seat. Would love for you to subscribe, but please introduce yourselves.
Yeah, I'm Jim Zanino with GoGo Aviation. I run the U.S. sales team on the customer side. Thank you for your 17 aircraft. Whoever owns them now, I hope you still have those GoGo subscriptions with them. I've been in aviation for about 35 years, so a lot of experience in both avionics and connectivity.
Hi, everybody. James Person with Viasat, and now incorporating what was Inmarsat. We acquired Inmarsat a couple of years ago, which includes the JetWave service and what was known as Swift Broadband, which today you would say is neither Swift nor Broad, but we have a number of geostationary K-band satellites and L-band satellites provide global service for business aviation, commercial aviation, military, government aircraft, and other things that move.
Awesome. So I think that's a great way to get us started, because before we get into the nitty-gritty of some of the things that are going on in the industry, can you guys just give us some basics in terms of, what makes a positive user experience today on an aircraft or on the ground in terms of upload, download speeds, latency, network handoffs? James, you want to kick us off, and then Jim, would love you to follow up.
Sure. What makes a good connectivity experience? And I'll speak to this from the perspective of large cabin and super mid-cabin business jets, because that's a market that we serve. And for those markets, everybody wants it to be global, reliable, consistent, excellent customer service. What you don't know you want is you want more than enough capacity where you're flying, because capacity is what leads to the speed and to the low latency. And you want a price point, both on the hardware and the service side, that will surprise and delight you. So I would say that's, in a nutshell, that's what people are looking for a connectivity experience, a good connectivity experience.
Yeah, to add on to that, like in the lower end market, like I said, the air-to-ground systems, everyone thinks the air-to-ground's going away because satellites and LEO are coming out. There's a great segment of aircraft, like your CJs, your Pilatuses, PC-12s, smaller airplane where satellite solution may not be the best solution for it. So those folks are looking for a low cost, easy to install, cheap to operate solution, which there's a lot of like the air-to-ground systems that fit that bill right now. So there's a lot of opportunity in that for the air-to-ground systems. So they're not really going away, but the same things apply. You want good customer service, you want a system that's reliable, is there for you, and you basically need to tailor it to what your needs are. So the person who's flying those smaller aircraft may not want the same capabilities. Like global may not really be an issue for these folks because they're not really flying your CJ usually across the pond that often. So it's, like I said, they tailor it to their mission. So that's one of the key things you need to do.
Well, I think a lot of us, we really get hooked up on like speed numbers, milliseconds and all these different things. It's okay, maybe you have, gigabit speeds in your house, but do you actually need a gigabit to be downloading that movie or whatever it is that you're doing online? So there's a lot more nuance to it, which we'll start to get into some more here. So going beyond the network experience for the user, let's talk about the equipment, availability, upgrades. We've all experienced some supply chain issues over the last few years. That's been stressing a lot of folks out. And I actually did an interview with GoGo a few years back, and I think this is one of the key areas that your team had really been focusing on for many years, if you want to share.
Yeah, so early on in COVID, everyone experienced all the supply chain issues that were going on. And when we started coming out of that, everyone was like, the demand went ballistic. Everyone was looking for product. They wanted product right away. A lot of the industries, as you guys know, didn't have the parts available. So one thing that GoGo did is our supply chain actually went in with our suppliers and helped them find parts. So we'd go through and work with them to find alternative sources to find those parts so they could build our equipment so we could build our product. So that was one of the big things that we did to really try to condense that supply chain. Now, like everyone else, we did have at one point like a 9-month to almost 12-month lead time, where we typically have like a 4 to 6 week lead time. And now we're back to the 4 to 6 week lead time with our product. So it was that basically preceding, helping the suppliers like 3 or 4 levels down that really made that change. And that's, I think you talked to Sergio about that a couple of years ago, how we did that to really come out of COVID and still have product available for a lot of folks.
Yeah, and in terms of hardware, James, what's a reasonable expectation for owners today? How do they need to think about upgrading their equipment? And what kind of cost are we talking about now, especially as there's new entrants to the market, some of which are not here?
Yeah, let me, I'll address that and the hardware availability issue. So at Viasat, we make our own hardware for the super mid and some large cabin. But on the Inmarsat side, you may know that we have third-party hardware from Honeywell and from others. And we were very fortunate. We escaped, knock on wood, all the supply chain issues. I think because our projections for the line fit is based a year or more in advance. So we were already built up and producing. So we escaped all of that, fortunately. But in terms of coming back to pricing, so people, when they're talking about hardware pricing, I've mentioned this before, on a super mid aircraft or super mid cabin aircraft, you can get our system installed new at the factory below $400,000, and even some aftermarket installations are down around that point, which is interesting because it's come down that cost curve and learning curve that you would expect. 10 years ago, our earlier version, our older and slower KU version, one OEM was charging, $700,000 to put that on for something that barely did voice, text, email, and maybe a little streaming. And today, for 40% of that price, you can get a system that has more than enough speed than you could ever use, streaming for everybody in the cabin, unlimited data support. So it's come a long way.
Now, we've explained some of the basics here, latency, speeds, those sorts of things, but I want to get into the acronyms. We love our acronyms in aviation. So the new entrant to the market, for those most of you know, low Earth orbit is the LEO versus geostationary satellites, which has really been kind of the legacy way of getting satellite data into the aircraft, and also air-to-ground systems, which GoGo has worked with for many years. But that's all shifting. GoGo has both LEO and ATG solutions that are coming. We also know that you can't speak about this. These are both publicly traded companies, so there's some things they can't share. But we do know it's been announced that GoGo intends on acquiring Satcom Direct. We'll see if that goes through. But let's start with Jim. Can you tell us, LEO, GEO, what are the differences? What do people need to care about? And what are you hearing from customers?
Yeah, so there's a lot of buzz out there with the newer the low Earth orbit satellites. So basically the OneWeb and Starlink systems are out there. A lot of buzz about Starlink, of course, because of Elon Musk. Each system has its advantages and disadvantages. So when you're looking for connectivity, you got to kind of match what you're trying to do at your aircraft, where you fly, and what you want for an experience on the aircraft against what system you want to put on your aircraft. So starting with air-to-ground. Air-to-ground, great system, has the ability to do streaming depending on what system you get. It's regional, though. It's only available in the United States right now. I think Europe has something for the airlines, and Saudi Arabia is supposed to be putting one in right now someplace. But for the most part, the United States only has an active air-to-ground system. So if your mission is mainly flying around the United States, air-to-ground is a nice system. It's low cost compared to satellites, and it's easy to install on the aircraft. As far as GEO and LEO, the only difference between those really is the orbits. So the GEOs are much higher. Geosynchronous means it's basically over a certain spot over the Earth and never moves. It's at 22,000 miles, whereas the LEOs are low Earth orbit. You're talking like 300 to 700 miles. Where that comes into play is really in what's called latency, because the signal's got to go travel that distance. Even though it's traveling the speed of sound, it still takes time. So that latency from your aircraft to the satellite to the ground station, it's got to go both directions, so that's going to make a difference. But GEOs are great for broadcasting straight down to the aircraft. They could do two-way. LEOs, the advantage with LEOs is the two-way communication is a little bit better than GEO right now, just because it's just a shorter trip. So you could do a voice call a little bit better. You could do video streaming a little bit better, like Teams or Zoom. Capacity-wise, the LEOs and the GEOs have about the same capacity as far as the amount of data that can be sent to the airplane. Things that you got to look at is antenna sizes and antenna placement. So with the LEOs right now, they're pretty much fuselage-mounted antennas, either a very large one or we have a smaller one at GoGo. So there's two sizes there. Most of your GEO products, for the most part, are installed in the tail and the radome. So that, drives how you want to do it. So for that kind of installation, you cannot put it on anything other than a Superman or above, because those aircraft below that do not have the ability to put in a geo satellite. So like I said, every system has advantages and disadvantages. The key what you got to do is think about what you're going to do, how much you want to pay, where you fly, and what you're trying to do, and then match the system to what you're trying to do on your aircraft. Everyone, there's no one solution fits all types on any aircraft. I mean, you can stick an antenna on any size aircraft, don't get me wrong. You can stick a gigantic antenna on a Pilatus. It won't look very good, but it will fit on the aircraft. Look at half the military aircraft that look kind of funky. It's just, what do you want to do with the aircraft, and what do you want to do with your connectivity?
And James, Viasat, I think, has traditionally been known as the geo provider, one of the leading geo provider. But last week, your CEO announced in the earnings call their conversations with Telesat to get some LEO bandwidth. Obviously, can't talk about that because it's a publicly traded company. Again, but I think you guys.
My CEO talked about it. So I can talk about it.
We got to make the attorneys happy. And for those who don't know, Starlink is a private enterprise, as Elon Musk, Telesat, OneWeb, who you guys are working with. There are a lot of these networks that are coming into play. Starlink's taken the lead, but that doesn't mean that others aren't on the way, including Telesat. And Telesat is strongly supported by the Canadian government. So, Viasat, James, how are you competing with these upstarts, and how are you going to start maybe integrating more options out there?
All right, how much time do we have? So I heard earlier when you described geos, I heard you use the term geo and legacy in the same sentence, and I would say that I wouldn't put it that way at all. I mean, geostationary satellites, there are some legacy geostationary satellites, to be sure. Those are the broadcast satellites that Jim talked about, designed for one-way communication. Think of DirecTV or something like that, or Sirius XM, with one giant beam covering an entire continent. Our modern geosatellites couldn't be farther from that than anything else. So a modern geosatellite has thousands of spot beams, has 1,000 times more capacity than those legacy ones, delivers today service that does not only streaming, but does two-way voice communications, video communications, the Teams calls. We do it in business jets, we do it in government aircraft. We're the provider for the US government blue and white fleet. They use our system globally in geo orbit, and it works just fine. Now, having said that, you're absolutely right. We are known as a geo provider, and our network is geocentric. Our plan has always been to be geocentric, which means that will form the core of it, because geo is the best way to deliver connectivity to business aviation, and we can talk about why that is later. But we've always said that we're going to be multi-orbit, and before we acquired Inmarsat, Inmarsat had a named plan, which I love the name of it. They call it Orchestra, and the idea there is GEO, MEO, LEO, and ground-based as needed. We're still integrating and maybe not calling that Orchestra anymore, but clearly we're going to be geocentric because we can provide the capacity where it's needed, which is 70% over North America and about 20% over Europe, and cover the rest of the world with geo capacity. But at the same time, there are some applications that you might want to do over the poles or polar coverage that LEOs might be helpful for.
So I want to bring up Smart Sky, because that's the other thing we haven't talked about much that shocked all of us. They raised over $350 million. A lot of folks in this room probably equipped their aircraft. There were large fleet operators who had been putting them on their aircraft. Went out of business. There may be efforts to revive them at this point. We're not really sure what's going to happen, but I think this has been a cautionary tale for all of us that, even the people that we thought that were going to be established players, we may need to pay attention. So, and Jim, how is this going to impact buyers in the future? How do people need to think about who they're working with? And I'm not saying Smart Sky specifically, but just in general, how do you know you're working with a company that's going to deliver for you and on a long-term basis and not just a flash in the pan?
Yeah, I mean, you got to look at just the company's financials. I mean, a lot of these companies are private, unfortunately, but the ones that are left right now, we're all publicly traded. So you can take a look at our financials and see, what their plans are, what their future plans are, how they're doing, profit-wise. So I think that's, look at the viability of the company. Like all of us, like Google, we've been around for 30 plus years. Viasat's probably been longer than that, I think, because you were.
Yeah, 30, going on 40.
Yeah, going on 40. I mean, the other folks out there like Collins, same thing. They're all like well-established aerospace companies that have been around for many years. Starlink is a new company, but they're very well-funded. I don't see them going out of business anytime soon just because of who they are, and they're also the only way we get astronauts into space right now because the other major corporation failed at getting their astronauts. Well, they got them up there, but they couldn't get them down. So there's a very viable company. It'll be around. I would be more worried about would they stick with the business, because who's Starlink going after? They're not going after the 24,000 business aircraft. They're going after the millions and billions of people in residentials. They already have 4 million subscribers, and they have like 300 aircraft. And if you add the airlines, those are all set up, a couple thousand. That's a rounding error to a rounding error to a rounding error to the amount of money they're making off the residential side of the house. And the amount of upkeep and to maintain a network for the aviation side and the levels of customer service, the expectations here are a lot different than your residential customer. So while they're well-funded, will they stick with the business? Will they actually stay there and actually want to deal with, a very niche market that requires very special care and a lot of, more overhead than a typical call center? So that's something you have to kind of take a look with Starlink. But like I said, I don't think there's a funding problem there.
Yeah, and there's an audience question. How is it that Starlink is so popular with 0 reps and virtually no support, which kind of dovetails in perfectly to what I was going to ask as well. There's obviously someone missing from the stage, and that is Starlink. Even at industry shows, I was joking with someone recently, you go to the Starlink booth, it's like a tiny table with a little bit of stuff on it versus, you guys who are pretty established and have large booths and teams. But that being said, they're making a lot of traction. We've got, Gulfstream has their own STC now to put them on the G650. We've got them now on King Airs, and they are aiming for gigabit speeds in the next year. Not saying that they're going to achieve that, but that is on their mission plan. So James, what do you have to say about all this? Unpack it.
I say, come on in, the water's warm. And I say that because, we've been the line fit provider for large cabin aircraft and super mids, especially on the Inmarsat side, nearly a monopoly position, which is not a great position to be in. But if you buy any large cabin, Global 7500, G700, 8X, 6X, it's going to come with a Viasat solution. And on all the others, it's an option. So we've got 1,800 business jets in service, about the same number of commercial airliners in service. And on the business jet side, there's a lot of interest in what Starlink is starting to do. And I would say that interest is in speed that's fast enough to do everything you want to do on the aircraft, and relatively, what I call it before, surprise and delight pricing for the service. We've been doing that for 5 years. I've got a $2,800 price point for service per month. I've got one that's under $10,000 unlimited, and both of us, Viasat and Starlink, are delivering more speed to the aircraft than any of us could use on the aircraft. And so you have to look at the other dimensions of value, which are the things we talked about in terms of customer support, market access even. There's about a 0% chance that a LEO-only network is going to get landing rights in China, Russia, or India. That's just the reality of the politics of the world. And we serve those markets. Well, we don't serve Russia today, but we serve the other markets with geosatellites, and we can do that. Like I said, welcome to Starlink. We welcome the competition. It keeps us sharp, but welcome. The water's warm. Come on in.
I think too. There's no doubt the fact that they've gone residential first, and even marine and yachting, it's become very popular. I think they've, even without having to do a lot of marketing and advertising, the word of mouth factor is big with them. But as they start to get into the business aviation market, which you guys have been in for a long time, I think they're going to start to see this is a unique industry that does have unique challenges, and maybe they're not the one size fits all for everyone.
Yeah, they adapt really fast. When they first came in the market, they're selling direct to the consumer, and they said, go find someone to install it for you. Then they decided to stop doing that now. Now they're working with MROs like the industry suggests. So they're flexible. They'll learn.
Yeah,
So,
and they,
competition, like James said, competition is good.
yeah, it is. And I mean, one thing I want to ask you about, and you had a great answer to this in our prep session, which is why I want to bring it up again. Starlink has over 4,500 satellites in their constellation. OneWeb, which is the group that you guys are going to be using for your Galileo solution, they have 648 with plans to do more. Does the number of satellites actually impact the user's experience, or does this not matter?
It doesn't really matter because it depends what the network's designed for. So OneWeb from the start was never really interested in residential coverage. They didn't want to sell to residential. There's what's called an enterprise network. So they're basically B2B. So basically aviation, maritime, no yachts, but really like commercial maritime, and basically business on the ground. So you don't need that same level of capacity that a Starlink would need when you're basically trying to serve millions upon millions of customers. So that's why their satellite system is designed the way it is. The one thing to look at, if you ever look at the constellation pictures of the two, the Starlink satellites are bulked between 52 degrees north and 52 degrees south. As you get to the polar regions, there's very few satellites in either one of those regions, which is whereas the OneWeb satellites are very consistent across the whole globe. And once again, that's the way it was designed based on what they're going after for a market. And that makes a difference as far as capacity. So there's more satellites, so they have more capacity because of the more satellites, but they're also going after a much, much larger market. And you're already starting to see some of that where they're stop selling terminals in certain areas of the U.S. because they hit capacity constraints. So, and by the way, those are the same satellites you're using to drive your aircraft. So if you're in one of those areas where you have capacity constraints for the residential, there's a potential for capacity constraints on the aviation side too, which is why their variability is from 40 to 240. There's a huge variability there. It's whereas with our OneWeb satellites, we're looking at variability from like 43 to like 58 and from like, 195 down to like 165. So they're much more constrained with it because we don't have the vast amount of users on the system.
Can I add to that? So I would make a very strong statement here, and I'll preface it by saying that Viasat is not anti-LEO, but we're definitely anti-LEO only in terms of delivering connectivity to business aviation. I would say delivering satellite connectivity to business jets the way Starlink is playing is the worst way to do it. And the reason is, whether it's 4,500 satellites now or their ultimate 10,000 satellites, each of those satellites has to be exactly the same because it moves around the world. Doesn't cover the poles, as you noted. But if you're that network designer, you're designing that satellite, are you going to design each Starlink satellite for what it needs when it's over Hawaii, over Fiji, or are you going to design it for what it needs when it's over Teterboro or Van Nuys or West Palm Beach? Well, either answer is wrong because not even Elon can afford to do it for what it would need for the capacity over Teterboro. And so the reality is the Starlink system designed somewhere in the middle, completely over-provisioned for over the oceans, but as Jim pointed out, not enough capacity for what it needs over North America, which is where 70% of business aviation happens. And so what we do with the GEOs, I've got 6 GEO satellites focused right on North America today, and I've got a global satellite constellation that when we're not using part of its capacity over the oceans, we turn off those beams and we use all that power over North America where you and your customers are flying. So it's a much better way to do it, let alone the sustainability issues of launching and recovering 10, which will be 30,000 satellites over the life of our satellites.
So rapid fire, we got a couple audience questions before we wrap up in the next minute. All right, the first one we'll go with, an antenna with no moving parts would seem to be less prone to maintenance issues if speed and pricing are comparable, so why go with GEO? I think that's
I would, having a fixed panel, is that a bug or a feature? We have very reliable geostation or mechanically steered antennas under the empennage of an airplane. We design our own ESAs as well, electronic steerable antennas, but we've chosen not to use them for GEO.
All right, and there was one other one there. Can we go back to? Oh yeah, thanks. In terms of in-fighting service, what does Starlink have that either of you don't? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure what they're asking.
In flight? Oh, maybe like customer service availability? That's a good one.
I mean, what they have that we don't have, they don't have a lot other than just a pipe right now. We have a lot of added features where you can actually track your service, track, what's going on with the airplane, how much data you're using. Theirs is basically, they're providing you just a pipe right now, more than anything else. They haven't put in any of the apps that, you see that, like we have, Satcom Direct has, Viasat has. There's a lot of things that customers, DOMs want to see other than just having a pipe. I think that's what the question was asking about. As far as their service, I mean, like I said, most of their service, what I understand, is done through text and email. There is no 800 number to call them. So if you have your principal in the back and the airplane's broken, you're sending a text or email to get service right now.
I'd say the main thing they have is Elon Musk, right? Because the previous way, or the main way it's been done, is a DOM or a chief pilot would do his due diligence, figure out the best solution for how the aircraft flies, where it flies, and make a recommendation to the principal. Elon's coming from the other side and saying to the principals in his Rolodex, hey, you should put my system on. And so they're doing that. But, I think the future is not going to be an either-or thing. We're seeing both and in terms of having them so they can hedge their bets a bit.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly a fascinating time. Thank you guys for taking the time to be here today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.